love your brain, love your life. But if you love your brain, you have to love your gut.
Yeah.
If you love your brain, you have to love your heart. If you love your brain, you have to take care of your liver. If you love your brain, you want to be really thoughtful with what you do with your skin, right? It all integrates.
Yes.
But I can transplant your heart and you will still be you. I cannot transplant your brain because you'll be somebody different. The purpose of your body is to support and carry around your brain, because you can lose most of the organs in your body or transplant them and you be you.
So Dr. Daniel Amen, thank you so much for being here at the MindHealth360 Show. You are a psychiatrist, a researcher, a brain imaging pioneer. You're the founder of Amen Clinics, which has 11 locations in the U.S. and hopefully soon further afield. You have the world's largest database of brain scans for psychiatry, totaling more than 250,000 SPECT scans on patients from 155 countries. You've seen tens of thousands of patients with ADHD from 3 years old to 105, and not just ADHD, but pretty much everything under the sun. You're the author of 20 national best-selling books, including Change Your Brain Every Day, Simple Practices to Strengthen Your Mind, Memory, Mood, Focus, Energy, Habits, and Relationships, which was brought out April 2023. And that's the one that I think we're going to discuss mainly today. So I just wanted to welcome you because you are such a groundbreaking pioneer in mental health and revolutionizing mental health. And I know that that's one of it's basically your life purpose. But the way you've revolutionized mental health, and, I love this, is that you've advocated looking at the brain rather than mental health. And so you talk about the fact that, unlike any other discipline in medicine, psychiatry is the one discipline that doesn't actually look at the organ that it's treating. So tell me about how you came to this conclusion, how you came across these SPECT scans, and what was the sort of insight that really helped bring this forward and then, leading to the journey that you've been on?
It starts when I'm 18 and Vietnam. So America's at war in Vietnam. And I become an infantry medic where my love of medicine was born. And I didn't go to Vietnam. I went to Europe, thank God for me. But I realized I loved medicine. I didn't like being shot at. And so I got retrained as an X-ray technician and developed a passion for medical imaging. As our professors used to say, how do you know unless you look? And that really stuck with me. And then 1975, I get out of the Army. I finish college, go to medical school. And when I'm a second-year medical student, someone I loved tried to kill herself. And I took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist. And I came to realize if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her. It would help me. It would help her children and her grandchildren, as they would be shaped by someone who was happier and more stable. So in 1979, which is 46 years ago, I fell in love with psychiatry, and I've loved it every day since. But I fell in love with the only medical specialty that never looks at the organ it treats. And with my X-ray background, I'm like, why aren't you looking at the brain? Obviously, schizophrenia is a brain disorder. It's not a liver disorder. It's not a heart disorder. Why aren't we looking at the brain? And they're like, we will, but not yet. And I'm like, why? And so I'm a middle child. And so I said, why a lot as growing up. And so I do my psychiatric residency at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., this huge 1,200-bed military hospital. We see all the weirdest things. And I'm like, why aren't we looking at the brain? And they're like, we will. And I'm like, well, why aren't we looking at it now? It's not ready. And then I was did my child psychiatry fellowship Why aren't we looking at the brain? And then my first job in the Army was I was the chief of the Department of Mental Health at Fort Irwin in the middle of the Mojave Desert. So it's an isolated assignment. And I brought neurofeedback, biofeedback to Fort Irwin because I was the boss. And I'm like, I want to look at the brain. And we started looking at the brain with quantitative EEG, which I did a week fellowship at Harvard on it. I liked it. I started using it with my patients. And then in 1989, I get out of the Army and I start our first clinic in Northern California. And we're doing neurofeedback, we're doing quantitative EEG. I love it. And then in 1991, I went to a lecture on brain SPECT imaging at the local hospital where I worked. And with EEG, you take electrodes, put them on the scalp, and you have to infer what's going on deep in the brain. And it's hard, and the resolution is poor. With SPECT, it's a nuclear medicine procedure. It's actually using radiopharmaceuticals that you inject, and you basically get an inside out look. And so the images had greater resolution, they were more beautiful, and it was so much more helpful. So I like both, but I fell in love with SPECT. And the first 10 cases, it literally changed the outcomes for my patients. And one of my favorite cases is Sandy. She tried to kill herself the night before. She came into the hospital the night before I went to this lecture. And as I went to the lecture, and then I went to meet Sandy. And as I was talking to her, I'm like, she has ADD. She has an 8-year-old son that has ADD. She's impulsive. She's very smart, but never finished college. She's underemployed. She picks on her husband. That's why the suicide attempt, they had a bad fight. And I'm like, I think you have adult ADD. And she goes, adults can't have ADD. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm the doctor. Adults absolutely can have ADD. But rather than argue with her, I said, would it be okay if we looked at your brain? And with our EEG work, what we found is that people who have ADD at rest have a pretty normal looking brain. But when you get them to do something, when you get them to try to concentrate, they get this surge of frontal lobe slow wave activity. Their brain turns off when it should turn on. And so I decided to do 2 SPECT scans, one at rest, one when she concentrated. And it's indeed what happened was her frontal lobe shut down when she tried to concentrate. And what hooked me on imaging is when I put the images on the table in her hospital room and I explained them to her, she started to cry. And she said, you mean this is not my fault?
Yeah.
And that was the moment I was with that imaging. You mean this is not my fault? And I wear glasses to drive and took them out of my pocket, put them on my face. I said, having ADD is sort of like people who wear glasses. People who wear glasses aren't dumb, crazy, or stupid. Our eyeballs are shaped funny. And we wear glasses to focus. People who have ADD are dumb, crazy, or stupid. The frontal lobes don't turn on when they need to, and the medicine just helps you focus. And from there, her marriage got better. She finished college. I mean, it's just a radical transformation. And the imaging helped that. Now, I knew the diagnosis, but it helped reinforce it. Well, I didn't know the diagnosis. That same week, I met Matilda, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. 69, left something burning on the stove, almost burned her house down. Her 5 daughters wanted to put her in a home. She didn't want to go. It was a big family fight. And they said, let's have her really evaluated, and brought her to the hospital. And by random chance, I was her doctor, and I thought she had Alzheimer's disease. But, now that I'm looking, I'm like, well, how do I really know unless I look? And when I scanned her, the pattern for Alzheimer's disease had been described in the 1980s on SPECT. It's bilateral, both sides, parietal lobe, top back part of your brain, decreased activity, which is why people get lost and can't find their way home, and decreased activity bilaterally in their temporal lobes. And she absolutely didn't have it. In fact, her emotional brain was working way too hard. And when you really sort of dissect her history, her memory started to get worse after her husband died. And she had this thing we call pseudo dementia, or depression that's masquerading as dementia. And I put her on Wellbutrin, one of the antidepressants I like. And within 3 weeks, she is running the cooking groups on the ward. She just it was like, oh, what's that movie with Robin Williams? It's not coming to me, but the transformation was spectacular. And you only have to have 2 or 3 of those experiences, and I've had thousands of them, where you get hooked on imaging. And then, our colleagues told me I shouldn't do it, but being a middle child, of course, I'm like, don't tell me what to do.
That's such a cool story. And one of the other things I loved about what you said in your book was that, you scanned thousands of convicted felons and 100 murderers. And one of the things I really love about your approach is how it enables compassion and forgiveness and empathy and understanding in a way that's almost you embody that. And part of what enables you to embody that is not just your personality, but also these scans, because you can tell that these people have damaged brains. So these convicted felons and murderers have damaged brains. And you make a good point. You say that's not to excuse them, but it's to understand what is driving them. And so the wonderful thing about what you're able to do is this element of compassion and understanding, which I think is so crucial, because it destigmatizes, it reduces blame, it reduces guilt in some ways. And I think that's so important when it comes to mental health.
It is so important. Dostoevsky said you can tell about the soul of a society not by how it treats its outstanding citizens, but by how it treats its criminals. Yeah. And I really didn't have an opinion on the death penalty before I started imaging. But then it started to make me very nervous. Is it really the sign of an evolved society to kill sick people? And I'm like, how do you know unless you look? Right? I mean, I do believe in evil, that there are evil people that do terrible things. But maybe they have frontal lobe damage, or maybe they've had mold exposure, or maybe they have Lyme disease, right? All the things we talk about at IMMH that, and I love IMMH so much, because I didn't learn any of it in my psychiatric residency, but I learned all of it in medical school. So when people go, oh, that's alternative medicine, I'm like, no, it's just good medicine, right? If you look at the comprehensive textbook of psychiatry, there's a whole chapter on mold. Yeah. There's a whole chapter on infectious disease causing psychiatric illness. It's just not part of everyday practice.
Why do you think that is? Because it's one of the things that's so frustrating. I mean, one of the things we're all aiming to do is revolutionize mental health care. And one of the ways we try to do that is to educate practitioners, educate lay people, to the fact that there are all these root causes for mental illness. And, traditional psychiatry will say, well, we don't really know the root causes, but we'll treat the symptoms with some CBT and some SSRIs, et cetera. But we know in functional medicine and in the medicine that you practice that there are root causes. And, you gave a great acronym, the Bright Minds, the 11 causes of mental health issues. So, but why do you think this is taking so long to get into the mainstream?
It's money. It's money and inertia. And the inertia comes from a broken paradigm that has been perpetuated with the DSM. So I hate the name of the DSM. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I hate that name. I've hated the term mental illness my whole career because it shames people. It's stigmatizing and it's wrong. They're brain health issues. If one thing is really clear from the 260,000 scans, is these are brain health issues. If I get your brain healthier, well, your mind is going to be better. Your brain, the physical functioning of your brain, creates your mind. It's not the other way around.
Yeah.
And so your brain is healthy. Your mind still needs to be programmed. So I love CBD, CBT. It's just critical. And you go, so why? Have you ever seen a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution by
No.
Thomas Kuhn? You should read it. And I love it because for the first 4 or 5 years, I was brutalized by my colleagues and have been periodically brutalized since then by them, but now I don't care. I cared early on, and I'm like, why don't they get this? This is so simple. Most 9-year-olds would go, oh, you should probably look at the brain if someone's depressed. If someone kills other people, maybe we should look at their brain, right? If you just start with the brain is involved in everything you do, how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along with other people. When it works right, you work right. And when it doesn't, you don't. A 9-year-old would go, you should look at that if somebody's having behavior problems or cognitive problems or feeling problems, right? This isn't hard. 1962, Thomas Kuhn, who's a medical historian, writes the book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. And he says scientific revolutions happen in 6 phases. And phase 1 is just normal science. You adjust the status quo, which I argue is a shit show. The status quo in psychiatry is symptoms equals diagnosis equals treatment. You tell the doctor you're depressed. He gives you or she gives you a diagnosis with the same name. You have major depression, and then gives you medicine, which in large-scale studies worked no better than placebo.
Yeah.
Last year, there were 340 million prescriptions written for antidepressants in the United States.
Wow.
27% of all doctor visits, someone is being prescribed a benzo. This is not okay. There's nothing about this that's okay. Step 2, or the second phase of the revolution, is somebody notices we have a problem. And I'm like, I diagnose people with the DSM with depression, put them on Prozac, and now they want to kill somebody. We have a problem. This is not a perfect diagnostic system. Step 3 is the status quo knows there is a problem. They know it. The head of the National Institute of Mental Health, Tom Insel, he said our outcomes in psychiatry are no better than they were in the 1950s.
Yeah.
We know there's a problem, but they make small incremental changes to protect the status quo, to basically protect the money, from how psychiatrists are getting paid now to the pharmaceutical industry. There's a collaboration. Step 4, somebody comes up with a new mousetrap. Imaging plus bright minds, people get better faster, and it's less expensive and more sustainable. Step 5 is the most predictable of all the stages, the rejection. People who try to change the status quo are ostracized, shamed, belittled. They try to kill you professionally. And step 6 is the acceptance. And I argue we're between 5 and 6. I'm actually working with the White House on a program to bring bring a brain health revolution nationally and internationally.
That's amazing. That's exciting. Very, very exciting. Okay, so that's fantastic. So, you are one of the change agents in this revolution, one of the key ones. So I'm interested also because, in functional medicine or in integrative mental health, we talk a lot about the importance of the body and the body's function, and whether it's, where you store trauma in the body, or whether it's your diet, or whether it's toxins. So it's interesting because you talk a lot about the brain as the key organ, but we know that so many of the other organs are essentially connected to the brain, and that brain health is completely dependent on our physical health, right? And so talk me through that. Like, how does the SPECT scan, how does looking at the brain enable you to diagnose? So a few things. First of all, how does it enable you to diagnose patterns that are specific to certain, what we usually call disorders? So maybe depression or anxiety or ADHD or dementia. So that's my first question. Like, how do these ailments?
Really, I mean, love your brain, love your life. But if you love your brain, you have to love your gut.
Yeah.
If you love your brain, you have to love your heart. If you love your brain, you have to take care of your liver. If you love your brain, you want to be really thoughtful with what you do with your skin, right? It all integrates.
Yes.
But I can transplant your heart and you will still be you. I cannot transplant your brain because you'll be somebody different. You'll be whoever that person is.
It's a good point.
And in some ways, it's a silly argument in that it's all interconnected. But I argue the purpose of your body is to support and carry around your brain, because you can lose most of the organs in your body or transplant them and you be you. But it all matters, right? I mean, the nervous system is everywhere in your body. And I have a new book coming out in December that I'm very excited about, called Change Your Brain, Change Your Pain, on the intersection between physical and emotional pain, and how chronic pain actually gets stuck in your brain. But it starts in your body, and then your brain recognizes it, and that's where you have to get it unstuck.
So interesting because, when you talk about the nervous system, I mean, there's so much right now which is about nervous system dysregulation. And a lot of people will talk about mental health as nervous system health, and mental illness as a dysregulation of the nervous system. So how do you connect that to your work with the brain? How this correlation between the nervous system and the brain? And how do you, do you take the nervous system into account when you treat, and how does one influence the other?
Well, the brain is just the central nervous system. And so it's sort of a little bit like the inner sanctum, but all of it matters. And you asked me about patterns. So, for example, with autism, people have too much activity in their frontal lobes, which is why the obsessive component of autism, and they have small, less active cerebellums. And so that's the classic pattern. But what I say with everything they all have multiple types. So ADD, for example, or ADHD shows this deactivation with concentration, but it shows other things as well. It's not one thing. All of them have multiple subtypes. Anxiety, we usually see too much activity in the basal ganglia, amygdala, insular cortex. Depression, I've just published a big study with researchers from USC with actually one of my main critics. I'm so excited about this. He told 20 years ago that I should be arrested for my work. And now we just published this great study in translational psychiatry.
That's so exciting.
They're the stories of my life that just bring me happiness.
I can imagine. That is so cool.
So we see patterns, but it's also, I think, important to assess each of those risk factors, which I think of Bright Minds is just smart integrative medicine. And I tell all of my doctors, read The End of Mental Illness, one of my books, because The End of Mental Illness goes through each of them in great detail. Well, how do you know if you have blood flow problems, which is cerebral vascular problems? How do you know if your brain and body is aging faster than you are? What genes should I test?
Yeah.
And like obesity, it's like, I'm a psychiatrist. Why do I care about people who have problems with their weight? It's because as your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down. And that should scare the fat off anybody. But, in our current day and age, it's like, oh, you can't say that. You're fat shaming. And I'm like, no, know the truth. The truth will set you free. This is a crisis. And
yes,
it explains in part why we have a mental health crisis, because we're physically, it's like 90% of people are metabolically unhealthy.
Well, that's the other thing is there's the big sort of revolution in metabolic psychiatry. And there's, Chris Palmer, for instance, will say, mental health is metabolic health. It's essentially a dysfunction in your metabolism and brain metabolism that leads to all these psychiatric symptoms. What's your view?
He has the answer.
Yes, he's like
Andrea, which is ridiculous. And I like him a lot. And SPECT actually measures 49% of the tracer is taken up in the mitochondria in the brain.
Really?
So I'm like, we have a lot to do, but it's way more complicated than that. Like one of the big lessons, if you said, hey, Daniel, what's the single most important lesson you've learned from 260,000 scans? Mild traumatic brain injury is a major cause of psychiatric illness. And nobody knows it because they don't look at the brain. Your brain is soft, about the consistency of soft butter. Your skull is really hard and has sharp bony ridges. Damage your brain, you damage the mind.
So what's the mechanism? So say you get whiplash and, your brain gets sort of shaken up inside your skull. What then leads to the mental health issues that then ensue? What is the mechanism of this small TBI causing such havoc in your mental health?
So your brain is the consistency of soft butter, and your skull has sharp bony ridges. So it tears blood vessels, it tears neurons, it causes scar tissue to form. And I can see evidence clearly decades after you've had an injury. I did the big NFL study when the NFL was sort of lying. It had a problem on traumatic brain injury in football. And I'd just been seeing high school football players, college football players. I saw my first professional football player 26 years ago. And I'm like, you have a workers' comp claim. It was Brent Boyd. He went public with our work, testified in front of Congress. And the NFL basically called me a quack and said his addiction and cognitive decline and depression had nothing to do with playing football. But you can clearly see the traumatic brain injury in his brain. And then when I saw my second player, Anthony Davis, in 2007, I wrote to the commissioner and I'm like, you should be the leader in brain health. But they were still pretty active in denial that football caused long-term brain damage. They've since admitted it and have given millions of dollars for research. I'm like, no. And so we did the first and largest study, high levels of damage. But 80% of our players get better when we put them on a rehabilitation program. And that's really the thing that drives me every day is, can I make your brain better? What is it I can do to make your brain better? Which is why I like hyperbaric oxygen. It's why I like omega-3 fatty acids, why I like helping you lose weight if you're overweight.
Yeah, and I mean, so it's interesting because in terms of the SPECT scan, one of the things that's very interesting to me is so it's sort of lack of blood flow, and then it's gray matter and white matter, which is less because there's a lack of blood flow. Is that the mechanism?
Well,
But you talk
it's,
about underactive and
it's
overactive, right?
also, it's partly that. And even though SPECT is a measure of regional cerebral blood flow, what that means, it takes the hottest spot, makes it 100, the coldest spot makes it 0, and it scales everything between those two poles. I think it's really measuring metabolism. And that's why, 49% of the tracer is taken up in the mitochondria, how active or inactive. And so if you hurt your frontal lobes, so you don't have full access to the judgment and decision-making areas of your brain. But it doesn't mean they're dead. It just means they're sleepy. Now, if you had a stroke or you had a catastrophic injury, maybe that tissue is dead, and we do not yet have the Lazarus treatment to bring the dead back to life. But we can get the sluggish more active by the different things we do. So when you see a scan, it's basically, it tells us three things: healthy activity, too little or too much. And then our job becomes balancing it. If it's too busy, well, that may be inflammation, or it could be past emotional trauma that activated those circuits. COVID, for example, is a great example. I had a whole bunch of my patients, I had scans on, they got COVID, their emotional health got worse. And so I'm like, I want to scan you. And their brains were on fire, especially their thalamus, their basal ganglia, the insular cortex. I'm on, of all things, the Kardashians, because I scanned Kendall Jenner when she had post-COVID anxiety. And if you looked at her emotional brain, it's like, oh my goodness. And so the goal is to calm it down. Well, how do you do that? Omega-3 fatty acids, curcumins, quercetin, hyperbaric oxygen.
So interesting. And so, for instance, you mentioned in the beginning, you talked about ADHD being a sort of slower movement in the PFC, right? So, do we know what causes that? So many people are born with ADHD or then they develop it. Do we know why then the PFC slows down with ADHD? Are there different root causes?
Yes, but I think if it's genetic, it's likely you metabolize dopamine much faster than other people. So it's a relative dopamine deficit. And we know the treatments that boost dopamine, whether it's Ritalin or Adderall, Wellbutrin, um, enhance dopamine availability, prevent the shutdown from occurring, and they do much better. But what about the people who don't do well on stimulants, who are clearly ADD? often their brain works too hard. I coined a term 1996 called the ring of fire, which is the problem is not that their brain is sleepy. The problem is it works way too hard. And it's sort of the difference between a freeway that is empty or there's a traffic jam going on. And the ring of fire is like there's too much. So these people are often assaulted with too many thoughts, too many feelings. So calming it down can be so helpful.
So I think that's what I'm really hearing from you is that balance is absolutely crucial. So, one of the things you talk about in your book is about boosting brain reserve. So you're saying, we're all going to have stress in our lives. We're all going to have things that are very difficult. So the key is to have those brain reserves. And you talk about it as being extra brain tissue and function so that you can deal with whatever stresses come your way. So essentially, when you say function, you mean balance function. So not overreacting, not underreacting. And is that correlated with tissue and blood flow?
Yes.
Okay.
And so if you had that whiplash and you have decreased activity in your frontal lobes, you're going to have less reserve. So you might function phenomenally in your day-to-day life, but now you come to a crisis like COVID where you lose someone you love and you fall apart. Why? You didn't have the extra reserve. Or another way to think about this is take two soldiers, put them in the same tank and expose them to the same blast injury. One of them walks away unharmed. The other one's permanently disabled. Why? It's the brain they brought into the accident that determines how they do after the accident. And I had an inkling of this idea. So this is one of my big ideas, brain reserve. In 1982, I wrote my first professional paper. It was called Post-Vietnam Stress Disorder, a metaphor for current and past life events. And what I argued in the paper was it was the brain you brought into Vietnam that determined the brain you brought out of Vietnam.
So true. I mean, it's so interesting. And so, okay, so genetics is a key factor. But what are the others? So you talk about the bright minds. So essentially, the bright minds are you talk about 11 risk factors, essentially, that then presumably reduce your brain's resilience to any sort of adverse effects, whether it's physiological or psychological trauma. Your brain will be more resilient if you have not had all these risk factors.
Neurology days. And this is my Alzheimer's prevention program. And I know you know Bredesen's work. And he says he's got the first program to prevent Alzheimer's, which is totally marketing because I wrote this in 2005. I wrote a book called Preventing Alzheimer's. And this is how you prevent it, but it's also how you prevent depression. You prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors. So B is for blood flow, R is retirement and aging, I is inflammation, which I think everybody agrees is a major cause of depression now. G is genetics. We're all vulnerable. Did you know if you have the apolipoprotein E4 gene, if you have one, you have 2.5 time increased risk of Alzheimer's. If you have two, you have a tenfold risk. If you have one or two and a head injury, it dramatically increases your risk even further. So I think anybody who plays a contact sport should know their ApoE gene status. H is head trauma, as we talked about. T is toxins. There's even reference to mold exposure in the book of Leviticus, the third book in the Bible, that mold will be bad for you. And even how to cleanse your house of mold. Wow. I thought it was so interesting. And other toxins like pesticides that you're eating. You have 100 trillion bugs in your gut. You don't want to poison them. The M is mental health issues like adverse childhood experiences. The second I is immunity and infections. And I believe infectious disease is a major cause of serious psychiatric disease. And everybody who has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder should be checked for them. The N is neurohormone problems, because when your hormones aren't right, your brain's not right. The D is diabetes, so being overweight and or having high blood sugar. And the S is sleep. And I think with that, I'm not missing any of the main ones that steal your mind, that damage your brain. And I'm so excited because it's so simple.
It's so simple. It's so simple, but it's so brilliant. And, coming back to your immunity and infections one, because I think that's one of the, you sort of have these trends in mental health. And at the moment, this is the sort of trendy one, is infections and immunity. Now, you've known for a long time that infections really impact the brain, but there's a lot of research now coming out since COVID, in fact, about the effects of infections on schizophrenia and bipolar, etc. And it's getting into the mainstream. Mainstream journals are saying, oh, this is so exciting, but you've known this for a while. What is the mechanism, though, with infection? So say you get Lyme disease, or you get COVID, or you get Epstein-Barr, or herpes simplex. I know that with a lot of autopsies and of something like 98% of Alzheimer's patients who've been autopsied have herpes simplex 1 virus. What is the mechanism that means that these infections cause this havoc in the brain and cause these mental health issues?
So I think it's the activation of your immune system with these viruses. And what we usually see early on is excessive activity, which goes with inflammation. Later on, we see all-out damage. We see that it sort of burns out some of the circuits and damages blood flow and damages the neurons.
Is it
When I first started imaging, chronic fatigue syndrome was a big deal. And I would get, as a psychiatrist, a lot of patients for chronic fatigue syndrome because the family doctors thought they were crazy. It's like, there's not a medical cause for what you have. Go see Daniel. And I would scan them and their brains looked trashed. And I'm like, this is not psychological. This is biological causing psychological problems. And that's how I sort of got on to this is an infection that we just don't know about yet.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. And when you look at your brain scans, how do you then correlate the root cause? How do you decide which root cause might, or which series of root causes might be causing that aspect on the SPECT scan and that manifestation and symptomatology?
So if we just look at Bright Minds, scans are a blood flow study. So right away I know but then I'll go, okay, so why do you have blood flow problems? Are you smoking? Are you vaping? Are you drinking too much? Are you not exercising? Do you have cerebral vascular disease? Are you not exercising? Right? So you see it and then you go, why? Your brain looks older than you are. So that would be the retirement and aging. Inflammation generally is too much activity, especially in the emotional centers of the brain. Head trauma is easy. Toxicity, I can tell your brain is toxic, but it doesn't tell me why. I have to go hunt down. That's why I have people like Dr. Philaday working for me. I have 6 functional medicine doctors working with me, and I'll go, he has a toxic brain. Help me find out why. Is it mold? Is it an infection? Is it anesthesia? Like, that surprised me. General anesthesia, for many people, it's toxic to their brain. If you're a child and you get anesthesia, you now have a higher incidence of ADD and learning disabilities. If you're an adult who has anesthesia, you have a higher risk of dementia. immunity and infections. I'll see either inflammation or toxicity that we have to hunt down. Hormones, if it's low, like thyroid, I'll see low overall activity. And then things like diabetes, I just see your brain's not healthy. I published a huge study. I've published 3, but a massive study on 33,000 people showing as your weight went up, the size and function of your brain went down.
Oh, it's extraordinary.
Well, horrifying. And then sleep apnea shows up. It actually looks like early Alzheimer's on the scan. Bilateral parietal lobe, top back part of your brain, it just looks sleepy. And whenever I see that, I'm like, you need a sleep study.
So interesting. And tell me about emotional trauma, because, we know the ACEs and childhood trauma, and there's a lot of zeitgeist around trauma as well. And the sort of common feeling amongst a lot of trauma psychotherapists is that, we're too focused on the mind. We should focus more on the body. So we should do somatic work, because essentially cellular memory in the body is what stores the traumatic event. It's a dysregulation of the nervous system. So how does that sort of sense of childhood trauma and trauma being stored in your cellular memory fit with your idea of the sort of brain being the key organ? And does the brain, as you said, it manifests trauma, but how do you correlate that with the brain, the body?
I actually published a series of studies, and we published a huge study this year on 7,500 patients with ACE scores. As your ACE score goes up, activity in your emotional brain, especially the anterior cingulate gyrus, goes up. And so in my work, Change Your Brain Every Day, I talk about the diamond pattern. It's excessive activity that looks like a diamond on the scans, that if you do treatments like EMDR, and I haven't studied somatic experience, but I imagine it would calm it down as well, that it has a significant impact on the brain. And I don't want to be sort of put in the box, I'm the brain and they're the body.
Yeah.
I'm both. And I think every thought you have affects every cell in your body. And
100%. Yeah.
yeah, so I wouldn't want to go, oh, Dr. Eamon's the brain and these people believe in the body. I'm like, they're all connected.
Totally. 100%. No, I totally, I think everybody is completely with you on that. And in terms of essentially, the other thing I find fascinating is, so you talk a lot about positive psychology and about the importance of positive thinking, positive messaging. You talk about the fact that the brain, the part of the brain that's dedicated to vision is about 30%. And so I found that fascinating. And so you talk about the importance of visualizing good things and visualizing, the importance of vision. And so, and that's sort of, you have a very, there's this very sort of cognitive behavioral approach, which I think is very helpful in terms of, your thoughts then dictate your feelings, then dictate your behaviors. And I've always been interested by something that Stephen Porges, who is the founder of the polyvagal theory, has been saying. His mantra is story follows state. And so essentially the story that you tell yourself, or the thoughts that you have, are actually dictated by your state, as in your nervous system state or your physiological state. And I've always found this dichotomy fascinating. And I think obviously the two are connected, but I'm very interested because I think you're saying the same thing, but in slightly different ways. And I've just been always very interested by, how can your story follow your state? What is it about your state that then dictates your story? And is it possible that your thoughts are not dictating your feelings, but it's almost the other way around? So it's your physiological state that then determines your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways.
Yeah.
We live in an undisciplined thinking society. where we're being pounded with negative news. And then we tend to watch things that are consistent with whatever we believe. And the news keeps you hooked by increasing the negativity. I have a book. It's here. Oh, it's right here. I did an interview earlier. It's called Captain Snout and His Superpower Questionings. It
That's so
teaches kids
cute.
not to believe every stupid thing they think. And so, but as we're thinking, I'm realizing if I had if I was like my wife and I had an A score of 8 and had a lot of stress growing up, what that did is damage my microbiome, and I'm more likely to be anxious for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm more likely to have mind reading, fortune telling, negative thoughts that if I didn't go through that trauma, I wouldn't have. Now, what do you do about it? Well, one, you get their microbiome healthy and you teach them not to believe every stupid thing they think.
Yeah.
And so it always goes both ways. So I teach all of my patients diaphragmatic breathing to get their vagal nerve to settle down. 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out. I call it the 15-second breath. That calms their state, but still at the same time, their ants are really highly populated ant automatic negative thoughts. And so as you calm down the nervous system, you still have to program.
I agree. I think that's true, and I think that's why the dual approach is so important from the ground up and also the top down. I think both are absolutely key. So, a couple more things. You talk about your 5 primary brain types, which I found fascinating because I really recognized, myself and other people in these descriptions of these brain types, and I thought they were brilliant, and how they corresponded to different parts of the brain that were either over or underactive. I'd never heard this before, and I thought it was totally brilliant because it associated personality with physiology of the brain, essentially. And so, can you just talk to us very quickly? I know there are 16 total types in combination, that's a lot, but if the 5 primary brain types, and then what's the corresponding in neuroscience, essentially the different parts of the brain that are either overactive or underactive?
So our balance type is type 1, and it's people who have a balanced brain. And
Lucky them.
generally resilient. They were way more of them before the pandemic. They were our primary type. After the pandemic, it went way down. And type 8, which is you have 2, 3, 4, and 5 together, skyrocketed.
I'm type 8. That's a bummer.
No, it just means there's so much better you can be. Type 2 is our spontaneous type. It's our ADD group, tend to have a bit of a short attention span, restlessness, distractibility, disorganization. But they're risk takers. I mean, they're awesome human beings. Don't make them your CFO in the business because that will not be a good place for them, but they're masterful at sales. Type 3 is our persistent type. They have high anterior cingulate activity. They tend to be perfectionistic. They like things a certain way. Can also, their vulnerabilities is they can be a bit argumentative and oppositional. And if things don't go their way, they get upset. So we work on flexibility with them. Remind me to tell you about the rule of 12. Type 4 is our sensitive type. Their limbic system is busy. They're highly empathic, make great therapists, but can tend to have ant infestations and go through periods of sadness. And type 5 is our cautious type. That they're always early for appointments. They like showing up, being on time, predict the worst, which can lead to anxiety for them.
S- So if you know that you are one of these different types, and I know then you can combine them and get 16 total types, and you know that, for instance, you have maybe you're impulsive, and so you have low activity in your PFC, or you hold on and you ruminate and you have a lot of ants, and maybe your anterior cingulate gyrus is too active, and that, what do you then do about this? Or you have an overactive limbic system, or once you've identified, okay, this is my type, these are the problems that I have with my brain, this is why I react this way, this is why I fight with my boss or my spouse, this is why I hold grudges. You have a whole toolkit, which you describe beautifully in this book, of ways to counteract the effects of all these things that are impacting your brain. And one of the things I love about this book is that it's really emphasizes the importance of habits and the importance of daily practice and tiny steps to really change your brain. And so, what are your sort of key go-to treatments and elements if you're trying to help people optimize and balance their brain?
I always think of people in four big circles. It's what are the biological things I can do? You have this type, these are the supplements or medicines or practices that will help balance the biology. What's the psychology? How can I get your thoughts right and help you eliminate the charges from past trauma? And then the social circle, how do the types inform your relationships? And the spiritual circle, which is why do you care? What is your deepest sense of meaning and purpose? So I feel like I work in those four spheres all the time.
You've done so much amazing research, and you've done so much amazing research into happiness and you've written so many amazing books. You've done so many amazing scans in people's brains. What are your sort of key takeaways? And I love your book, which I've read, about happiness. So I found that one really inspirational. What are your key takeaways in terms of what you've learned on what are the sort of 5 key things that people can do to improve their brain health and to be happy, essentially?
I worked with BJ Fogg for 6 months. He wrote the book Tiny Habits. He runs the Persuasive Tech Lab at Stanford. And the first thing is ask yourself every day, is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that with information and love of yourself, love of your family, love of the reason you're on earth, you just start making better decisions. Alcohol is not a health food. Marijuana is not innocuous. We need to be more thoughtful about brain health. 2, start every day with today is going to be a great day. We have to discipline our mind in a world where we're so connected to negativity and scandal and natural disasters. Our brain loses its foundation. And so I believe you have to direct it. End every day with what went well today. It's so powerful. And I've done it 10 years, longer, maybe. And I say a prayer when I go to bed at night, and then I go, what went well, and just review my day. You'll show up tonight. And because I've enjoyed this very much. And my dad died about 5 years ago, and it was the worst day of my adult life. And when I went to bed, I went, what went well? And there's another great strategy I do with all my patients called give your mind a name. so you can gain psychological distance from the noise in your head. And Hermie, that's my mind's name, went, really? We're going to do this tonight? You're a bad son. But because it's my habit, I did it. And my mind immediately went to an interaction between my mother and the police officer. And because he died at home, they had to do an investigation. And she looked at him with this deadpan face and said, "Do you think I killed him? Do you think I was having an affair?" And I'm like, Mom, but she, in the midst of tragedy, was funny. And I just thought that was so awesome. And then I thought about all the texts I got from the people who love me and love him. And then I just thought about holding his hand before the mortuary took him away. And I went to sleep because I had been disciplining my mind to help me rather than allowing it to hurt me. And then when I go to eat something or drink something, I just ask myself, do I love this? And does it love me back?
That's beautiful.
Because people like, oh, but I love pizza or I love Rocky Road ice cream. Yeah, but they beat you up. They abuse you. And I don't know if you've ever been in a bad relationship, but I have. And I'm not doing it anymore. I'm married to my best friend, and I'm damn sure not doing it with food. That I am only going to be in love. And people go, well, how can you have any fun? And we have a high school course called Brain Thrive by 25. And I love it so much. And when we teach kids what to avoid, invariably it's a boy, it's never a girl, raises his hand and go, how can you have any fun? And we play a game with the kids called Who Has More Fun? The person with the good brain or the person with the bad brain? And I turned 70 this year. And I'm like, so what do I really want? Energy, memory, passion, purpose, meaning, making a difference. The alcohol doesn't fit any of that. Rocky Road doesn't fit any of it. I get to live my purpose, but I only get to do that if my brain is healthy. And then when you go 50% of people 85 and older will be diagnosed with dementia, I'm not okay with that. Those aren't odds I'm okay with. So why would I play with it unless I was sort of stupid?
Yeah.
And for my athletes, I have this NBA player I love that I help. It's like if you had $1 million racehorse, would you ever get it high? Would you ever feed it junk food?
Never.
Only if you were an idiot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so it's that sort of mindset that keeps me happy and focused. And
I think that's amazing. And I think I guess my only question is, so for people though who really have challenges, so for instance, maybe they've grown up in a moldy home, they've had childhood trauma and abuse, they've been fed processed foods, it can seem like a real uphill battle. So maybe they're fighting with, maybe they have 4 or 5 ace scores, plus they've had a toxic environment, plus they've had processed food, it's like, how do they climb out of this? Because it takes a huge amount of willpower and knowledge and resource in some ways to get to where they're able to drag themselves out of that. So what is the answer for?
what it takes is this good for my brain or bad for it? What it takes is knowledge and love.
Yeah.
That's what it takes. I did a show with NBC on, so how can poor people do this?
Right. Yeah.
And it's not rich or poor, because usually the rich ones in society, before, were obese and had gout and all of that because they had the means for bad habits. It's mindset. It's if we teach people to love and care for their brains, and then it becomes, is this decision better than that decision?
Mm.
That, if you stop going to Starbucks and spending $7 on a cup of fancy coffee, but you just drink water, right? You have a simple filter at home that helps filter your water. Well, that's not expensive. It's more than anything, it's mindset. And I believe we're living in a time of war. So I don't know if you heard, the president was at the Department of Justice, and he talked about a conversation he had with the Mexican president. And Mexico exports a lot of drugs, but they don't use a lot of drugs. And he's like, why are you not a using nation like the United States? And she said, well, we're close with our families. And he's like, we're close with our families. And she said, we also have a very effective, aggressive drug education campaign.
Mm.
And he's like, we need to do this. And so he commissioned someone like $50 million to put together. And I'm working with some friends I have in the White House. And I'm like calling them and go, it's not enough. Last year, Anheuser-Busch spent $6.8 billion for sales and marketing.
Yeah.
We need a defense budget
Yes.
against the things that are really likely to kill us. So you and I are not likely to die from a nuclear weapon.
No.
We are much more likely to die from cancer,
Yeah.
from diabetes, from heart disease, from depression and suicide.
Yes.
So I believe we need a defense budget where we see the evil that is being done in our world. And in my book, The End of Mental Illness, and still there are sections in Change Your Brain Every Day, if I was an evil ruler and I wanted to create mental illness, what would I do? I'd create a society where daily marijuana use went from 1 million in 1992 to 17 million last year.
Wow.
And I would create that society where Jack in the Box is feeding a high percentage of the population, or Burger King or McDonald's, when what they're doing is poisoning us.
100%. No, I totally agree. And what about your views on digital devices and sort of the digital social media problem and the effects on our brain, and especially on our young people's brains? What are your views on that?
Yeah, it's a dopamine dump.
Yeah.
We're wearing out the pleasure centers in their brain by giving them these devices that were unleashed on our population with no neuroscience study. And when the neuroscience study came out, it's went, these are bad.
Yeah.
And I think we should go the way of Australia, which is they banned social media for kids under 16. Well, that's brilliant. That's taking what we know in neuroscience and making it public policy. Or here in California, where I am, they said schools cannot start before 8 o'clock in the morning. There's no more zero periods because kids need to sleep. That's taking neuroscience research and making it public policy. So I like that. I want to be involved in that. Is just I made a video for a bill in Arizona that is banning certain ingredients in processed foods in school lunches. And I'm like, it's just brilliant because people are taking what we know. So, when you're swimming in this and you go, it's just so overwhelming, the level of disease, one person can make a difference. But you got to manage your own mind so you're not hopeless or helpless. And we can make a difference.
100%. And I mean, I always look at China and, and TikTok. And I mean, they have, 2 hours of TikTok a day and it has to be educational, right? They have spinach TikTok. And I think, in some ways we're poisoning our societies by letting unfettered access to our kids to essentially these drugs. And, a country like China is way ahead of us in that sense.
Well, if we become politically active, we can. And I remember when I spoke at your conference in October that I said this, and I was actually surprised that it came out of my mouth. I said, if we have the same administration stay, nothing is going to change for our health. But if the new administration comes in, we're at least going to have a different conversation. And I was right. I'm so excited that people like Mehmet Oz are going to be involved. I was at his confirmation hearing last week, that, RFK Jr. And when people really understand his position is about asking questions. It's not telling you what to do, but it's like, does this have the right research so you can feel confident it is safe? I have vaccine damage scans.
Yes.
But yeah, when it's appropriate, I'll get vaccinated. But
Absolutely.
I always tell my patients, your best defense against COVID or whatever is your immune system. How is your immune system where you heard none of that coming out of Fauci and the prior
No,
ones?
nothing.
It was shameful.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. And then one final question. What are your top favorite supplements for the brain?
Well,
And you mentioned
I
lead
take
liquor.
so many.
Yeah.
But, I own BrainMD, and I'm so proud of it. We have a new product called Peak Energy that won the Nexty Award, sort of the equivalent of the Grammys in the supplement industry.
That's so cool.
It's made with ATP and paraxanthine, which is a metabolite of caffeine that doesn't make you pee, doesn't keep you up, and doesn't give you the jitters. It's just the smoothest energy. Yeah, I love that. I think everybody should take a great multiple vitamin because we live in a vitamin deficient society. I think everybody should take an omega-3 fatty acid supplement. We actually make a vegan omega-3 that is high in EPA. I think it's the best omega-3 ever made. I think everybody should know their vitamin D level, and most people need to supplement with vitamin D3, K2. A huge fan of ginkgo. The prettiest brains I've ever seen take ginkgo. I like lion's mane. I like curcumins. But my favorite, the one I have not missed in 5 years, is Happy Saffron. I love saffron. There are 25 randomized controlled trials showing it to be equally effective to antidepressants. And rather than it mess with your sexual function, it's pro-sexual. So it enhances sexual function and it helps with memory. So memory, mood, sex. I'm like, oh, I think I'll take that.
Yeah, I'll bet. How much should you take?
Well, we make something called Happy Saffron, where 3 a day. The dose in most of the studies is 28 to 30 milligrams.
Got it. Amazing. Well, I must say, Dr. Ammon, you are just so full of amazing advice and tips and wisdom and insight. And I think the world is lucky to have you. And very, very lucky to have your take on the brain and the importance of a healthy brain. And, it's so different from most conventional psychiatrists who talk about mental health in a sort of rather vague way. And so it's just fantastic. And I have to say, hats off for all the work you've done and all the work you continue to do in changing people's lives. And I'm just really grateful.
Well, I look forward to seeing you again. What you guys are doing with the conference is just spectacular. I'm so glad you're at the head of it.
Thank you so much for listening to the MindHealth360 Show. I hope that we've helped you realize that mental health symptoms have root causes that can and need to be addressed in order to sustainably heal, and have given you some ideas about steps you, your loved ones, or clients may take to start their healing journey. Please share this interview with anyone you think may find it helpful, and don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with our latest interviews on integrative mental health. If you want further information, please go to www.mindhealth360.com or find us on social media. This information is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or to replace medical advice. Please always consult your healthcare practitioner before discontinuing any medication or implementing any changes in your diet, lifestyle, or supplement program.